Hello, and welcome to my channel. I am going to read an excerpt of All Boys Aren't Blue by George and Johnson. And this is a memoir. So let's read the first introduction. Black, clear in here. This is the story of how I entered the world was a foreshadowing. When my aunt first saw my head full of beautiful jet black curly hair crowned by my mother's womb, she ran into the hospital's hallway where my family waited. It's a girl, she yelled to my grandmother's excitement and to my father's slight disappointment. But by the time my aunt got back to the delivery room and I had been fully born, she realized her quick assumption would soon need correcting. She ran back out to the family. Actually, it's a boy. That it's a girl, no, it's a boy mixed up is funny on paper, but not quite so hilarious in real life, especially when the star of that story struggles with their identity. Gender is one of the biggest projections placed onto the children at birth, despite families having no idea how the baby will truly turn out. In our society, a person's sex is based on their genitalia. Of course. That decision is used to assume a person's gender is a boy or girl, rather than a spectrum of identities that the child should be determining for themselves. Nowadays, we are assigning gender even before birth. We have become socially conditioned to participate in the gendering of children at the earliest possible moment, whenever a sonogram can identify its genitalia. Gender reveal parties have become a trendy way to celebrate the child's fate, staring them down if life has masculine or feminine ideals before ever meeting them. It's as if it is more visible LGBTQIA+ people become. The harder the heterosexual community attempts to apply new norms, I think the majority fear becoming the minority, and so they will do anything and everything to protect their power. I often wonder what this world would look like if people were simply told you're having a baby with a P or Z or other genitalia. Look up intersex if you're confused about other. What if parents were also given instructions to neutral their baby by paying attention to what the child naturally gravitates towards, and to simply feed those interests? What if parents let their child explore their own gender instead of pushing them down one of the only two roads society tells us to exist? When our gender is assigned at birth, we are also assigned responsibility to grow and maneuver through life on the simple checking off of those boxes. Male, check. Female, check. Black, check. White, check. Straight, check. Gay, check. Kids who don't fit the perfect boxes are often left asking what the truth is. Am I a girl? Am I a boy? Am I both? Am I neither? As a child, I struggled mightily with these questions, and that struggle continued to show up in various ways throughout my life. Now, as an adult, I have a much better grasp of sexuality, gender, and the way society pressures us to conform to what has been the norm. I understand how this sense of normalism normativity, I don't know how to pronounce that word, doesn't hold a space for those of us who don't fit the aesthetic of what a boy or girl should be, or how a man or woman should perform. Ultimately, we are still struggling to move the conversation past assumed identity at birth, and LGBTQIA+ plus people are not just fighting for the right to self-identity, to be accepted in a society that is predominantly composed of two genders, which would be the bare minimum of acceptance. We are also fighting to survive physical acts of violence. Many of us are not even surviving that. The spectrum of our traumas can be as broad as our identity. I started writing this book with the intention that every chapter would end with solutions for all the uncomfortable or confusing life circumstances I experienced as a gay black child in America. I quickly learned that this book would be about so much more, about the overlap of my identities and the importance of sharing how those intersections create my privilege and my oppression. Many of us carry burdens from our trauma, from the traumas of our past, and they manifest in our adulthood. We all go through stages of accepting or struggling with our various identities, gay, straight, or non-identifying, and race and various other factors play a role in how we navigate them. Many of us are always in a state of working through something, always in a state of becoming a more aware version of self. This book is an exploration of two of my identities, Black and queer, and how I become aware of their intersections within myself and in society. How I've learned that neither of those identities can be contained within a simple box, and I enter the room as both of them despite the spaces and environment I must navigate. In the white community, I am seen as a black man first. It doesn't negate the queer identity that will still face discrimination. In the black community, where I more often find myself, it is not the black male identity that gets questioned immediately. It is that intersection with queerness that is used to reduce my blackness and the overall image of black men. Because this is a memoir, I'm sharing some of my personal memories with you. These memories are specific to my experience as a kid, teen, and young adult. But they also underline some of the universal experiences of the black and or queer people. My struggles are that of black men and queer men and people who exist at the intersection of both identities. That is where the manifesto part comes in. I believe that the dominant society establishes what idea of what normal is simply to suppress differences, which means that any of us who fall outside of their normal will eventually be oppressed. In each chapter of this book, I'll tell you memories of my experiences growing up, and what I think they mean in a larger context of living as a black queer person. I grew up hearing the word uh, nigga, I don't know, which was a term of endearment in my home. It has become a term of endearment in many black families. By the time I was in middle school, I was using the word regularly with friends. It was the the thing to do as a 13-year-old, that is, to curse and to use the N-word. We were all doing it. It was how we greeted one another, how we clowned one another. We had different tones and inflections. They could tell you the way the word was being used, but never with the ER at the end. We knew saying that word with the hard R meant something different. In high school, I stopped using it. Surrounded by my witnesses, I wasn't going to dare let my classmates get comfortable using that word with or around me. Anytime a white student even tried to utter it, I checked them. White kids love to test black kids and things like that. Certain black kids were fighting so hard to fit in that they would let white kids steal that part of our culture just so they could pretend they were accepted in white society. By college, I was back in a predominantly black school, back to using the N word again with my new friend. It was just like middle school, except as an adult, I knew I could use it, and no one could say anything to me about it. Truth be told, most professors hated that we used the word. They were of the opinion that the word had too much hatred in it for us to ever be able to take back full ownership in any variation. The N-word was the last word heard by many of my ancestors when they were being beaten and shackled, forced into enslavement in the new land. It was the last word heard by my people when they were lynched as a spectacle for white people. Strange fruit hanging from the popular tree, as the great Nina Simone would sing. So for many of my professors who grew up during Jim Crow, experiencing legalized segregation, there was no reason to be proud of that word. It was during those years in college, right after college, that NAACP and the National Action Network decided that it was time for the black community to bury the N-word. There, this There was this belief that if we stopped using it, the word itself would lose power. This brought our arguments on both sides, people for and against this action to destroy a world that is so tied to the most painful part of history in America. I began to shift to the side that thought it was best to bury it. At that time, I was learning how to be a respectable Negro with the good grades and a college degree, attempting to fit into white society, wherein I felt I deserved to be treated as an equal. It was important to me that I didn't use that word because I felt it made us less than. I felt that using the word was a bad thing because white people cringed when we said it, because certain black people cringed when we said it. To me, it just didn't make sense to keep using it, especially because it remained controversial. I did what I always did with most things I didn't want to deal with, buried it. It wasn't just trying to bury the N-words though. Burying the N-words, I was burying my queerness. If I couldn't see parts of my own blackness as respectable, there was no way I was ready to see my queerness as respectable either. But now I know that queerness is a part of blackness, and that there is no blackness without queer people. Then, early in 2012, Trayvon Martin was killed by George Zimmerman. My entire perspective shifted on being a black person in white society. I saw that a new age civil rights movement was being led by people who looked like me, people who were fighting for me and other black children. It was during this time that my unlearning process really began. My eyes were opened by seeing the shootings of black people in the hands of police, seeing the killings of black children that Khmer rice in the hands of police, seeing that it didn't matter whether you were an affluent black, a poor black, a child, or an adult. In the eyes of society, I was still an M.
Can I give you a napkin?
Yes, sure. Come on. Napkin open. Here. And my love for my blackness meant that I had every right to fight for my people and every right to take back ownership of that word. I started using the N-word again. I understand now that my blackness is self-defined and that to use the N-word or not use the N-word is my choice. But it shouldn't be based on the comfort of those who constantly seek to evaluate me. I understand now that there is no such thing as a respectable Negro in the eyes of society, nor was I ever made to be one. Black. My second identity, queer, is a journey that I will be on until the day I die. And I honestly believe that. Every day I learn something about myself. I get to sit and look back at all the times my queerness displayed itself, both in ways known to me and unknown to me. As a child, I always knew I was different. I didn't know what that meant at the time, but I now know it is okay to be that different kid. That being different didn't mean something was wrong with me, but that meant that something was wrong with my cultural environment, which forced me to live my life as something I wasn't. The fact that I couldn't see my full self in Black heroes or the history books was more about the changing of history to spare white guilt than it ever was about knowing the whole truth. I learned that kids who saw me as different didn't have an issue until society taught them to see my differences as a threat. Those differences, like being effective or effect, effect, effeminate, I don't know that word, and sassy, were constantly under attack my entire childhood from kids who didn't even know why I needed to be shamed for those differences. It wasn't them shaming me as much as it was those raising them who taught them to shame others with those qualities. Most kids aren't inherently mean. Their parents, however, can make them mean. By the time I reached middle school and high school, suppression was my only option. I had become even more of a more majority in the population, and I had to deal with the intersection of blackness and queerness, and the double oppression that generates for the first time ever. Fighting for blackness in a white space came naturally to me though, and I did it every chance I got. Fighting for my queerness, however, never seemed to be viable or a safe option. I lived that isolation for all those years in high school. I only saw snippets of queer representation in small television roles. They were rarely played by people who looked like me, but it was never to the extent that I ever gained the confidence to be that person. Thankfully, college opened my eyes to true reflections of myself in literature, in art, in class beside me, not early on, but right on time. I realized that the things I had always been running from had never left my side, that the things I had been chasing were all just enough to turn me into someone I didn't want to be. In college, I took a risk and did something that was so far away from being queer that it should have put me even deeper in the closet. I joined a fraternity. I was trying to preserve an image of masculinity for myself, something that black fraternities have run on for years. However, in finding the brat, I found myself. I found brothers with common experience, chasing the same thing. And instead of the universe giving us what we thought we wanted, it gave us what we actually needed. It gave us an unconditional love and brotherhood from a shared queer experience. It gave me brothers who could see my humanity outside of my queerness. It gave me the confidence to define my blackness and my queerness and my manhood and my masculinity.
Masculinity?
Yeah,
There you go.
of lack or lack thereof. I got to live in total, total, totality, and for the first time ever exist as both black and queer in the same space, and be loved for it, not shamed. Queer. I want the words of my life story to be immortalized. I want to immortalize this narrative of joy and pain, this narrative of triumph and tragedy. Tragedy? What? I'm messing up. Tragedy. No, that's not it. This narrative of the black queer experience that had been erased from the history books, an existence that had been here forever. I've never thought about immortality before. I've always assumed that my mortality would be linked to my inability to survive as a black queer person. I have the deaths of so many people who look like me in mind, from the HIV epidemic to domestic violence to suicide. I watch people like me who don't survive the oppression. They become today's news and yesterday's headlines. I remember being nervous about writing a book like this. I wasn't sure if this was my story to tell. In writing this, though, I realized that I wasn't just telling my story. I was telling the story of millions of queer people who never got the chance to tell theirs. This book becomes less about having the answers to everything, because I haven't been through everything. It became less about being the guide and more about being the gateway for more people to find their truth and find their power to live in that truth. I often think about a statement Viola Davis made when she won her first Oscar. Something along the lines of encouraging people to go to the graveyard and dig up all the dead bodies in order to hear and tell the story of those whose dreams were never realized. These are the stories she's interested in telling. Although that is valid, I must challenge it. This book is proof positive that you don't need to go to the graveyard to find us. Many of us are still here, still living and waiting for our stories to be told, to tell them ourselves. We are the living that have always been here, but have been erased. We are the sons and brothers, daughters and sisters, and others that never get the chance to see ourselves, nor to raise our voice to ears that need to hear them. Toni Morrison states my favorite quote of all time.
Robert.
If there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. This is the story of George Matthew Johnson. This is the story for us all. So that is the first chapter of Boys Aren't Blue, the memoir. And definitely interesting in that. So, and this is out now, I believe. It is out now. I believe, yeah, it's out now. Where's the date? Yeah, this says 2020. So it was released already in 2020. So go pick it up at the local bookstore. And thank you, publisher. What publisher was it? Thank you, Fierce Reads, for sending me this book, for review, and check it out. If you like this video, give a thumbs up, comment down below if you have read this book or want to read this book. I don't care. Subscribe if you hadn't. Ring the bell for notifications. I post every Monday and Friday. And I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.